Jared wiped the sweat from his forehead and leaned against the rusty old tractor. The sun of Orin 7 was brutal, beating down on the dry land like a hammer. His farm stretched far and wide, but the soil was tough, and the crops barely survived. Life here wasn't easy, but Jared had no choice. Earth was too crowded, jobs were scarce, and this distant colony was the only place he could afford land. His farm wasn't much, just a small house, a water pump, and a few stubborn crops that refused to die. His only companions were an old farming bot with a bad leg and a sky full of stars. It was lonely, but Jared had learned to live with it. Then, everything changed the day he found her. It started with the wind. A fierce sandstorm had rolled in from the north, turning the sky into a swirling mess of dust and fire. Jared had been outside, securing the crop covers, when he saw something moving in the storm. At first, he thought it was an animal, but as the figure stumbled closer, he realized it was a person. Jared ran toward the stranger, covering his mouth with a cloth. The storm howled around them, making it hard to see, but he reached out and grabbed the figure's arm. It was thin, trembling, and covered in dust. He pulled the person toward his house, dragging them inside just as the wind slammed the door shut behind them. For a moment, there was silence, except for their heavy breathing. Jared looked at the stranger. It was a woman, an alien woman. Her skin was a soft shade of blue, her eyes large and golden, and her clothes were torn and dirty. She looked exhausted, barely able to stand. "You all right?" Jared asked, offering her a water bottle. The woman took it, drinking greedily before coughing. She nodded slowly. "Thank you." Her voice was soft but firm. Jared pulled up a chair. "What were you doing out there?" "You're lucky I saw you. Another hour, and that storm would have buried you alive." She hesitated, looking down at her hands. "I was traveling. Got lost." Jared raised an eyebrow. "Traveling? Through the middle of the desert? In a storm?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she pulled the ragged cloak tighter around her shoulders. Jared sighed. He had met plenty of drifters on Orin 7, people running from something. He wasn't the type to ask too many questions. "Well, you can stay here until the storm passes," he said. "Name's Jared, by the way." The woman looked at him, her golden eyes searching his face. Then she said, "Mira." Mira didn't speak much after that. She ate the food Jared gave her, then curled up on the small couch and fell asleep almost instantly. Jared sat at the table, watching the fire flicker in the old heater. Something about her didn't add up. Most aliens he met in the colony wore fine clothes, worked in business, or traveled in ships. He had never seen one alone, lost, and dressed like a beggar. But he wasn't about to throw her out. Not when she clearly needed help. The storm raged outside for 2 days. During that time, Mira barely spoke. She helped around the house, cleaning dishes and fixing a broken water pipe without being asked. Jared was surprised. She was quick, smart, and stronger than she looked. On the 3rd day, the storm finally died down. The sky cleared, and the desert stretched before them again. Jared expected Mira to leave. Instead, she stood by the doorway, her hands clenched. "Can I stay?" she asked suddenly. Jared blinked. "Here." She nodded. "I can work. I don't have anywhere else to go." Jared hesitated. He lived alone for a reason. People brought trouble. But there was something in her voice, something desperate. And he knew what it felt like to have nowhere to go. Finally, he sighed. "All right. You can stay. But you work, just like me. No free meals." A small smile crossed Mira's lips. "Deal." And just like that, Jared's quiet, lonely life changed forever. Jared had lived alone on Orin 7 for years, working from sunrise to sunset just to keep his farm running. He never thought he'd have company, let alone an alien woman who barely spoke and had appeared in the middle of a sandstorm. But Mira was here now, and she wasn't the type to sit around doing nothing. The morning after she asked to stay, Jared woke up to the smell of something cooking. He rubbed his eyes and walked to the small kitchen, surprised to find Mira standing over the stove, flipping something in a pan. The old heater barely worked, but she had somehow managed to get it running. "What are you doing?" Jared asked, scratching his head. "Cooking," Mira said simply. Jared looked at the plate she had set on the table. The food looked decent, alien ingredients mixed with human supplies, but at least it smelled good. He sat down and took a bite. His eyebrows lifted. "This is actually not bad," he admitted. Mira just nodded, sitting across from him with her own plate. Jared noticed she ate fast, like someone who wasn't used to regular meals. He didn't ask. He had learned that she only spoke when she wanted to. After breakfast, Jared handed her an old pair of gloves and led her outside. "If you're staying, you're working," he said. Mira pulled on the gloves without question. The first job was repairing the irrigation pipes. Orin 7 was dry, and water was precious. The pipes often got clogged with dust, and Jared usually spent hours fixing them. But Mira crouched beside the broken pipe, ran her hands over it, and within minutes she had found the problem. She adjusted a few bolts, cleared some debris, and just like that, the water flowed smoothly again. Jared stared. "How did you do that so fast?" Mira wiped her hands on her cloak. "I watched how it worked. It was simple." Simple. Jared had spent months figuring out how to keep the system running, and she had solved it in minutes. He didn't know whether to feel impressed or embarrassed. They moved on to the crops next. The tough alien plants needed careful handling, and Jared expected Mira to struggle. But again, she surprised him. She moved through the fields quickly, fixing weak stalks, adjusting soil levels, and even spotting signs of disease Jared had missed. "You've done this before," Jared said, watching her work. Mira shook her head. "No." Jared frowned. "Then how?" She looked up at him, her golden eyes calm. "I learned fast." That was an understatement. By the end of the day, she had repaired the irrigation, tended to the crops, and even fixed the old farming bot's bad leg. Jared had spent weeks trying to fix that thing. That night, as they sat by the fire eating dinner, Jared finally asked, "Who are you really?" Mira didn't answer at first. She stared into the fire, her face unreadable. "I told you," she said finally. "I was traveling. Got lost." Jared sighed. "You're too smart for a traveler." Mira's lips curved slightly. "And you are too kind for a lonely farmer." Jared didn't know how to respond to that, so he just kept eating. Days passed, and Mira became a part of the farm's daily life. She never complained, never asked for anything, and worked harder than even Jared himself. She was strong too, stronger than she looked. One day, while Jared was carrying a heavy sack of grain, he slipped on a patch of loose dirt. The sack was too heavy, and he braced himself to hit the ground. But before he could fall, Mira caught him with one hand. Jared froze. Mira pulled him upright, as if he weighed nothing. He stared at her. "How did you?" "I learned fast," she repeated, setting the sack down effortlessly. Jared didn't say anything, but now he was sure. Mira wasn't just some lost traveler. She was something else, and he was going to find out the truth. Days turned into weeks, and Mira became more than just a helper on Jared's farm. She was strong, smart, and hardworking. Life on Orin 7 was tough, but with her around, things felt easier. She repaired machines faster than Jared, harvested crops more carefully, and even found ways to improve the farm. But Jared wasn't just impressed, he was curious. Mira had no past, or at least none she would talk about. Where did she come from? Why was she alone in the desert? And how was she so strong? One evening, as they sat outside watching the twin moons of Orin 7 rise, Jared finally asked, "Why don't you ever talk about your past?" Mira glanced at him, then looked back at the sky. "Does it matter?" Jared frowned. It does to me. Mira was silent for a long time. Then she said, I left my old life. I wanted something different. Jared waited, but she didn't say more. He sighed. Maybe he would never get a real answer. Still, something had changed between them. Jared found himself looking at her more often, noticing the way she worked, the way she always helped without being asked. He wasn't sure when it happened, but one day he realized he didn't want her to leave. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a long day of work, Jared spoke without thinking. Mira, he said, will you marry me? She turned to him, her golden eyes unreadable. Jared's heart pounded. Had he made a mistake? Then, to his surprise, Mira smiled. A real smile, not the small ones she usually gave. Yes, she said simply. Jared blinked. Really? She nodded. I have nowhere else to go. And I like it here. That was enough for Jared. The next day, they held a small wedding. No fancy ceremony, no guests, just the two of them standing under the open sky. Jared placed a simple metal band on Mira's finger, and she did the same for him. It was quiet, simple, perfect. For the first time in years, Jared felt like he had something more than just a farm. But that happiness didn't last long. Strange visitors. It started with shadows. Jared noticed them first. Strange figures in the distance, watching the farm from behind the sand dunes. At first, he thought it was his imagination. But Mira saw them too. One night, as they were checking the irrigation system, Mira suddenly tensed. We're being watched, she said quietly. Jared turned, scanning the darkness. Who? I don't know, she murmured. But her eyes were sharp, alert. They've been here before. Jared didn't like the sound of that. He reached for his old rifle, just in case. Then, the ship came. It was late at night when Jared heard the low hum in the sky. He ran outside, heart pounding. Above the farm, a sleek, high-tech ship hovered silently. It was unlike anything Jared had ever seen. Black metal, no markings, and way too advanced for common traders. Mira, he called, you need to see this. Mira stepped outside, took one look at the ship, and froze. Jared had never seen fear on her face before. But now she looked trapped. Before he could ask what was wrong, a voice boomed from the ship. Miriala, it is time to return. Jared's blood ran cold. Miriala. He turned to Mira, but she was already stepping forward, her hands clenched into fists. I'm not going back, she said, her voice sharper than Jared had ever heard. The ship remained silent for a moment. Then the voice spoke again. Your time is up. Your father demands your return. Jared's head spun. Her father. What was going on? Mira turned to Jared, her eyes full of something he couldn't understand. I'm sorry, she whispered. Then the ship descended toward them, and Jared realized he had married someone far more important than he ever imagined. The black ship hovered above the farm, its engines humming like a beast ready to strike. Dust swirled in the air as the wind from its thrusters battered the ground. Jared tightened his grip on his rifle, his heart pounding. From the ship's underside, a bright blue light shone down. A group of figures emerged, stepping onto the dusty ground with smooth, practiced movements. They wore long, dark robes, their faces hidden beneath silver masks. Jared's grip on his rifle tightened. He had seen aliens before, but these were different. They moved like soldiers. One of them, taller than the rest, took a step forward. When he removed his mask, Jared saw a face similar to Mira's. Blue skin, golden eyes, but with sharp features that made him look older and more dangerous. The man's gaze locked onto Mira. His voice was calm, yet it carried power. Miriala, you have caused enough trouble. Jared turned to Mira. Miriala. He had called her that before. Was that really her name? Mira's hands curled into fists. Her expression was cold, unreadable. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was angry. "I am not going back," she said. The tall man sighed, shaking his head. "You have embarrassed our family, running away to live in dirt with a human." His golden eyes flicked to Jared. "How low you have fallen." Jared stepped forward. "Who are you?" The man barely glanced at him. "I am Lord Saren, leader of the Zirian trade empire. And she," he pointed at Mira, "is my daughter, the rightful heir to the throne." Jared felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. Mira, a princess. He looked at her, trying to make sense of it. She had never acted like royalty. She worked harder than him, ate simple food, never complained. How could she be someone so powerful? Mira's voice was firm. "I gave up that life." Saren's expression darkened. "You do not get to decide that." He turned to his soldiers and waved a hand. "Take her." Jared didn't think. He just reacted. He raised his rifle. "No one is taking her anywhere." The soldiers paused, glancing at each other. Then Saren laughed. "You are bold, human. But do you really believe you can stop us?" Jared swallowed hard. The truth was, he couldn't. These weren't bandits or wild animals. They were trained warriors with advanced weapons. But he couldn't just stand there and do nothing. Mira stepped between them. "Jared," she said softly, "put the gun down." He hesitated. "Mira." "Please," she said. Slowly, Jared lowered the rifle. Saren smirked. A wise choice. But Mira wasn't done. She turned to her father, her chin lifted high. "You cannot take me by force. You know the law. I am married." Saren's smirk vanished. The soldiers shifted uncomfortably. Jared frowned. "What law?" Mira kept her eyes on her father. "Under the old Zirian code, a royal cannot be taken from their bonded partner without trial. If I am truly unfit for my title, then let the court decide." Jared didn't understand all of it, but he knew one thing. Mira had just put her father in a difficult position. Saren's jaw clenched. "You dare to use the old ways against me?" Mira didn't blink. "Yes." For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Then Saren exhaled. "Fine. You want a trial. You will get one." He pointed at Jared. "But your human will not survive it." Jared's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" Saren smirked. "You will fight for her. That is the law." Jared's heart pounded. He had expected trouble, but not this. Mira turned to him, her expression serious. "You don't have to do this." Jared looked at her. He saw the woman who had saved his farm, who had worked beside him every day, who had chosen him over a life of power. And he knew his answer. "Yes, I do." Saren chuckled. "Then it is settled. Prepare yourself, human. You have 3 days." The ship's engines roared, and within seconds, the Zirian warriors disappeared into the sky. Jared stared after them, his fists clenched. He had 3 days to prepare, 3 days to prove he was worthy. Or he would lose Mira forever. Jared had 3 days. 3 days to prepare for a fight against warriors from a powerful alien empire. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a fighter. He was a farmer. His life was about fixing machines, growing crops, and surviving in the harsh deserts of Orin 7. He had never trained for battle, never held anything more dangerous than his old rifle. But now, everything had changed. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for Mira. The training begins. The first morning, Jared woke up to find Mira already waiting outside. She had tied her long cloak around her waist, her arms crossed. "You don't have to do this," she said. Jared rolled his shoulders. "Yeah, well, I already said yes." Mira sighed. "The Zirian trial is not fair. It is not about skill. It is about proving worth. They will not go easy on you." Jared gave a small smile. "Then I guess I'll just have to make them regret it." Mira studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we train." And so they did. Mira was fast, strong, and precise. Jared, on the other hand, struggled. She taught him how to move, how to dodge, how to read an opponent's stance. But no matter how much he tried, she was always 10 steps ahead. "You're holding back," Jared said, wiping sweat from his forehead after another failed attempt to land a hit. "If I don't, you'll break something," Mira replied. Jared chuckled. "Good point." But even though she was stronger, she never made him feel weak. She corrected his form, showed him tricks, and helped him use his strength in smarter ways. He wasn't the fastest, but he had endurance. He wasn't the strongest, but he was stubborn. He wouldn't give up. By the end of the second day, his arms ached, his legs burned, and he had bruises everywhere. But he felt ready. The trial begins. On the third day, the black ship returned. Jared and Mira stood outside, waiting as the warriors descended. Lord Saren stepped forward, his golden eyes filled with amusement. "You should have run, human," he said. Jared cracked his knuckles. "Not my style." Saren smirked and waved a hand. The soldiers stepped aside, revealing a massive armored warrior. His skin was deep blue, and his arms were covered in metallic bands that shimmered in the sunlight. He was twice Jared's size. "This is Kiran, my champion," Saren said. "Defeat him, and Mira stays." Jared exhaled slowly. He wasn't surprised. They had sent a monster. The warriors formed a circle around them. The fight would take place here, on Jared's own land. Mira stood at the edge, watching, her expression unreadable. The champion, Kiran, stepped forward, rolling his shoulders. His voice was deep and calm. "I will make this quick." Jared smirked. "We'll see about that." Saren raised his hand. "Begin." The fight. Kiran moved fast. Jared barely dodged the first attack, a powerful swing aimed at his head. The force of it cracked the ground where he had just been standing. Jared's heart pounded. One hit. That's all it would take to break him. But he had something Kiran didn't. Endurance. Jared danced back, keeping his movements light. He couldn't overpower Kiran, but he could outlast him. Kiran charged again, aiming a brutal punch at Jared's chest. Jared twisted at the last second, using the momentum to roll away. The warriors watching murmured in surprise. A human had just dodged a Zirian warrior's strike. Kiran growled, his eyes narrowing. This time, he didn't hold back. Jared felt the air shift, a feint. Kiran pretended to punch but instead spun, sending a powerful kick toward Jared's ribs. Jared barely blocked it. The impact sent him skidding across the ground, his arms screaming in pain. He coughed, struggling to stand. Mira took a step forward. "Jared." He lifted a hand, stopping her. "I'm fine." Kiran exhaled. "You are stubborn." Jared wiped blood from his lip. "Yeah, I get that a lot." Then he saw it, an opening. Kiran was stronger, but he was overconfident. He expected Jared to fall. He wasn't guarding his lower body. Jared took a deep breath. Now or never. He lunged forward, dropping low and sweeping Kiran's legs out from under him. The warriors gasped as the massive champion crashed to the ground. Jared didn't stop. He leaped on top of Kiran, using all his strength to lock the warrior's arm and twist. Kiran roared in pain. Saren's expression darkened. Jared gritted his teeth. Yield. Kiran struggled, but Jared had the advantage. If he moved, his arm would snap. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Kiran exhaled and tapped the ground. "I yield." The warriors were silent. Then Saren sighed. "It is done." Jared let go and stepped back, his body aching. He turned to Mira, who was staring at him, her golden eyes wide. Then she smiled. A real proud smile. Jared grinned back. "Told you I'd make them regret it." Victory and departure. Saren stepped forward, his face unreadable. "You have won, human." Jared braced himself for another trick. But instead, Saren bowed slightly. You have proven yourself, he said. The law is clear. My daughter stays. Mira let out a slow breath. Saren met her gaze. You will always have a place in our world, Miriella. But if you truly wish to stay here, I will not stop you again. Mira's expression softened. Thank you, Father. Saren nodded once. Then, without another word, he turned and stepped onto the ship. The warriors followed. Within minutes, the ship disappeared into the sky. Jared exhaled, his body aching but victorious. Mira stepped beside him. You fought well. Jared smirked. Not bad for a farmer, huh? She chuckled. Then, without warning, she leaned forward and kissed him. Jared blinked. What was that for? Mira smiled. For winning. Jared grinned. Then I should win more often. They stood together, watching the sky, knowing that from this moment on, they were truly free. The black ship was gone. The warriors had left. Jared and Mira stood together, watching the sky where Lord Saren had disappeared. It was over. Jared had fought, won, and Mira was free to stay. No more secrets, no more running. Or so they thought. The days after the fight, life on the farm slowly returned to normal. The crops still needed tending, the machines still broke down, and the desert winds still howled at night. But something was different. Mira no longer looked over her shoulder. She no longer flinched at the sound of ships passing overhead. She was at peace. Jared, however, felt something else. Unease. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Mira noticed. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she asked, "What is it?" Jared poked at the fire with a stick. "I don't know. It's too quiet." Mira raised an eyebrow. "Isn't that a good thing?" Jared exhaled. Maybe. But deep inside, he didn't believe it. And he was right. The warning. 2 nights later, Jared woke up to a strange beeping sound. He sat up groggy. The farm was dark, the stars shining overhead. Mira was still asleep beside him. Then he heard it again, a sharp, repeating beep coming from outside. Jared grabbed his rifle and stepped out into the cool night air. His heart stopped. At the edge of the farm, half buried in the sand, was a small metallic device blinking with red light. Jared didn't know much about alien technology, but he knew a tracker when he saw one. Someone had marked their location. An old enemy returns. Mira, wake up. Mira's eyes opened instantly. Jared had learned long ago that she was a light sleeper. "What is it?" she asked. Jared tossed the tracker onto the table. "We have a problem." Mira sat up and stared at it. Her golden eyes darkened. "This is Xyrian military tech," she said, "but not my father's." Jared's stomach clenched. "Then whose?" Mira hesitated. "There is another." Jared frowned. "Another what?" Mira took a deep breath. "When I was young, my father had a rival, Lord Vexer. He was once a high-ranking commander, but he was banished for trying to overthrow my family. He disappeared after that. No one knew where he went." Jared rubbed his forehead. "And you think this tracker belongs to him?" Mira nodded. "It makes sense. If he learned that my father came here, he may have followed." Jared muttered a curse under his breath. "So what does he want?" Mira's voice was cold. "If he's here, he wants me." The attack. They had no time to prepare. Just as Mira finished speaking, the sky lit up with flashing lights. Jared ran outside, gripping his rifle. His heart pounded. A new ship was descending from the clouds, larger than Saren's, covered in black armor with red markings. And it wasn't alone. 3 smaller ships flanked it, speeding toward the farm like hunting beasts. Jared ran back inside. "We need to go. Now." Mira was already grabbing a small bag of supplies. "We don't have a ship." Jared's jaw clenched. "Then we fight." Mira stared at him. "Jared." "No," he interrupted. "I'm not running. Not again." Mira studied his face for a moment. Then she nodded. Then we fight. The battle for the farm. The first blast came before the ships even landed. A bright red laser struck the ground near the water tanks, exploding in a ball of fire. Jared ducked as the shockwave knocked him off his feet. Mira pulled him up. They're trying to burn the farm. Jared gritted his teeth. Not if we stop them. The ships landed in the distance, and dark figures emerged. Tall warriors in heavy armor, their weapons glowing red. Jared aimed his rifle. Mira crouched beside him, gripping a small dagger-like weapon that hummed with energy. Then the soldiers attacked. They moved fast, blades flashing, guns firing. Jared pulled the trigger. 1 shot, 2 shots, 3. His bullets hit one soldier in the chest, another in the leg, but they kept coming. Mira was faster. She darted between the enemies, her blade slicing through armor like paper. She moved like a storm, her golden eyes flashing in the firelight. Jared wasn't as quick, but he was strong. When a soldier lunged at him, he dodged and slammed his rifle into the alien's helmet, knocking him to the ground. One by one, they fought their way through the attackers. But the real danger hadn't arrived yet. Vexor appears. A deep mechanical voice echoed across the battlefield. Enough. The remaining soldiers stepped back, forming a path. Jared turned, his chest heaving. A tall figure in black armor stepped forward. His face was hidden behind a dark helmet, his eyes glowing red. Mira's body tensed beside Jared. Vexor, she said. The figure chuckled. Miriala, you've grown strong, but not strong enough. Jared raised his rifle, but Vexor lifted a hand, and Jared's weapon was ripped from his grip by an unseen force. Jared's breath caught. Vexor had tech that controlled gravity. Weak, Vexor said, just like your father. Mira's expression darkened. You shouldn't have come here. Vexor smirked. And who will stop me? You? Mira charged. Their blades clashed in a flash of blue and red light. Sparks flew as Mira and Vexor fought like lightning, their weapons colliding again and again. Jared tried to move, but the gravity around him felt heavy, like he was stuck in place. Vexor was winning. Jared's heart pounded. He had to do something. Then he saw it, a loose power cable near the burning water tanks. An idea struck him. With every ounce of strength, Jared forced himself forward, grabbing the sparking cable. Vexor had Mira pinned, his blade inches from her throat. Jared didn't hesitate. He threw the cable at Vexor. Electricity surge. Vexor roared as the energy coursed through his armor, shorting out his gravity tech. Jared rushed forward and punched Vexor in the face. The warlord staggered back. Mira didn't waste time. She spun her blade and slashed across Vexor's chest. The warlord collapsed, smoke rising from his armor. The battle was over. For now, Jared turned to Mira, breathing hard. Told you I'd fight. Mira smiled. And you won. But they both knew Vexor wouldn't stay down forever. And the real fight was still coming. Smoke rose from the battlefield. Jared stood over Vexor's fallen body, his fists clenched. The warlord's black armor was cracked, and smoke leaked from the exposed circuits. His red eyes flickered weakly, his body struggling to move. It was over. Jared turned to Mira. We did it. But Mira wasn't smiling. Her golden eyes remained locked on Vexor. No, he is not dead. As if responding to her words, Vexor let out a low chuckle. Jared's grip on his rifle tightened. Even after everything, the fight, the fire, the electricity, Vexor was still alive. Vexor's last trick. Vexor's helmet cracked open, revealing his face for the first time. His skin was dark blue, his jaw sharp, his expression cold. His red eyes gleamed with hate as he looked at Mira. You think this is over, he rasped. Jared lifted his rifle. I don't think, I know. But before he could pull the trigger, Vexor lifted his arm and pressed a small device on his wrist. A deep rumbling filled the air. Jared felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. Mira's eyes widened. "He called for reinforcements," she said. Jared cursed. "How many?" Mira didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because in the next moment, the sky turned red. The incoming fleet. Jared and Mira looked up as dozens of black ships appeared in the sky, their engines burning bright like falling stars. A fleet. Jared felt his stomach drop. He had fought a small group of Vexor's warriors, but now the real army was coming. He turned to Mira. "We can't fight that." Mira's jaw clenched. "We don't have to." Jared frowned. "What do you mean?" Mira looked at Vexor, then back at the sky. Then she whispered something Jared didn't expect. "We call my father." A dangerous gamble. Jared hesitated. Saren just left. "You think he'll come back?" Mira exhaled. "He has to. If Vexor takes me, it will bring war to my father's empire. He won't allow that." Jared wasn't sure if that was true, but they had no other choice. Mira pulled out a small silver communicator from her belt. She pressed it. A moment later, a deep voice answered. "Miriala." Mira's fingers tightened around the device. "Father, Vexor is alive. He's here." And he brought an army. A long silence. Then Saren's voice turned cold. "I am coming. The battle begins." Vexor smirked, watching them. "It won't matter. My army will burn this planet before your father arrives." Jared narrowed his eyes. "Not if we stop them." Vexor chuckled. "You? A farmer?" Jared punched him in the face, knocking him unconscious. Then he turned to Mira. "We hold them off, just long enough." Mira nodded. The fight wasn't over yet. Defending the farm, Jared and Mira ran back to the house. Jared grabbed every weapon he had, rifles, explosives, anything that could slow the enemy down. Mira took a deep breath. "We can't fight them directly, but we can make it difficult." Jared grinned. "Traps." Mira smirked. "Traps." They worked fast. They set explosives near the water tanks, rigged wires across the fields, and buried charges under the sand. Jared looked up. The first ships were landing. "It's time." The first wave. The first group of soldiers charged forward, their red weapons glowing. Jared aimed his rifle and fired. The first enemy dropped. Then the second. But there were too many. Mira moved like lightning, cutting through them, dodging attacks, moving faster than Jared had ever seen. They fought, side by side, but the enemy kept coming. Jared's rifle clicked. Out of bullets. A warrior charged at him, a blade raised high. Jared braced himself. Boom! An explosion erupted behind the enemy lines, sending soldiers flying. Jared blinked. What? Then he saw it. A black and gold warship descending from the clouds. Saren had arrived. The turning point. The moment Saren's ship landed, Zurian warriors in golden armor flooded the battlefield. The fight changed instantly. Vexor's soldiers, once confident, began to retreat. Jared and Mira stood together, watching as Saren himself stepped onto the battlefield. The warlord's golden eyes locked onto Vexor, who was slowly waking up. "You have lost," Saren said. Vexor growled. "Not yet." But before he could move, Saren lifted his hand, and a beam of golden energy shot from his gauntlet, striking Vexor in the chest. The warlord collapsed. Saren looked at Mira. "Are you hurt?" Mira shook her head. "No." Then Saren's gaze moved to Jared. Jared straightened, unsure what to expect. Then Saren did something unexpected. He nodded. "You fought well, human," he said. Jared smirked. "Not bad for a farmer." "Huh." Saren's lips twitched, almost a smile. The end of the battle. Vexor's army was defeated. His soldiers surrendered, and his ship was seized. Jared exhaled, his body aching. It was finally over. Mira turned to him. "We did it." Jared grinned. Yeah, we did. Then, without warning, Mira kissed him. Jared blinked, then smiled. What was that for? Mira smirked. For winning. Again. Saren cleared his throat. Miriala, you are still my daughter. My offer stands. Mira looked at him. And my answer is the same. She took Jared's hand. I stay here. Saren studied them for a long moment. Then he nodded. Very well. He turned to Jared. Take care of her. Jared grinned. Always. Saren's forces left soon after, taking Vexor into custody. The sun rose over the desert, shining on a new day. Mira looked at Jared. So, what now? Jared smiled. Now, we fix the farm. She laughed. You really are a farmer. Jared smirked. And you're a rich heir. But here, we're just two people trying to make a life. Mira squeezed his hand. Then let's make it a good one. And together, they walked into their future.